Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hey, thank you for listening. I do appreciate that. Whether it's first thing in the morning at America One Radio, 9 to 10 a.m. weekdays, 5 to 6 p.m. the replay there, 11 p.m. to midnight on Progressive Voices via TuneIn. God bless you late night, folks. We appreciate you doing that. Or if you listen in your leisure, wherever you podcast, when you podcast, I thank you. So it turns out all that hand-wringing about what the MAGA-filled state election board was doing here in the state of Georgia was much ado about nothing, judicially speaking. We'll get this from WSAV-TV in Savannah, Georgia.
WSAV is your local election headquarters, a decision that came down just this evening. A judge ruling in favor of a lawsuit filed by local Republicans that invalidates recent election rule changes passed by the Georgia State Election Board. WSAV's Christine Quayle explains what this means for your vote.
So, Tina, two of the major changes we're going to see in light of this decision are that ballots will no longer have to be hand counted, and an undefined reasonable inquiry into election results before certification will also no longer be an option.
The decision came just after 6 o'clock tonight from Fulton County Superior Court Judge Thomas Cox. In recent weeks, the Republican majority on the state election board passed the 7 rules listed in the lawsuit, but Democrats have denounced them, claiming they would cause chaos on Election Day and could be misused to dispute the results. But the lawsuit that produced today's verdict was actually filed by Republicans.
We could debate all day long whether or not each of these rules is a good idea or bad idea. What we're saying is it's not the role of the state elections board to make these rules.
James Hall is a plaintiff, but also a member of the Chatham County Board of Elections. I spoke with him yesterday before the hearing.
Whether we think the rules are a good idea or a bad idea is immaterial because it all goes back to separation of powers, and this is a regulatory board with unelected officials, and they simply don't have the authority to make laws like the Georgia General Assembly does.
The other plaintiffs in the suit are Scott Turner, a former Republican state legislator, and his election advocacy organization, Eternal Vigilance Action. Other similar groups joining in like Right Count.
We filed an amicus brief to support the lawsuit that the state election board had overreached their duties by trying to basically legislate election laws instead of just carrying them out, that they crossed a line.
And the suit from Hall and Turner isn't the only one that's been ruled on in the last few days. A different Fulton County judge ruled late last night specifically that election staff in Georgia will not be required to hand count ballots, and another ruling hours before that requiring election results to be certified under all circumstances.
Right.
Now, something important to remember here, the other side can appeal any of these decisions, but there isn't much time left because the election is on November 5th. There were also a total of 7 rules that were invalidated by this decision tonight. Christine Quayle, WSAV News 3.
In a statement released late yesterday evening, the folks from Fair Fight Action sent a press release. Fair Fight CEO Lauren Groh-Wargo responded, "Today's ruling is a major win for Georgia voters, independent elections, and American democracy. The court's decision to invalidate these MAGA-backed rule changes is a huge blow to their broader plan to inject chaos into our elections and help Trump sow doubt about the 2024 outcome. The election denier conspiracy, driven by key Trump allies who aided his scheme to steal the 2020 election, is being stopped in its tracks. The rule of law is prevailing, and MAGA's election chaos plot is crumbling." Lauren Groh-Wargo will join the show. Later on, we'll have a discussion with her about this and some other key fault lines still being fought at the state and federal level when it comes to election integrity. Looking forward to that conversation. Speaking of election integrity, we've been getting hints, subtle hints, I think, that the vice presidential nominee on the Trump ticket has been warming his way over towards becoming an election denier. Wasn't so the case in 2020 or 2021, 22, 23, or even most of 2024. However, J.D. Vance has been curious about trying out election denialism. Yeah, he's been tri-curious, and now he's just flat out involved.
What message do you think it sends to independent voters when you do not directly answer the question, did Donald Trump lose in 2020?
I think...
Listen to that crowd. Venomous.
Sir, look. First of all, on the election of 2020, I've answered this question directly a million times. No. I think there are serious problems in 2020. So did Donald Trump lose the election? Not by the words that I would use.
I wouldn't use words in front of that rabid audience either that are plain and fact-based. Yes, Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. The most fair election in American history. Here are the facts, y'all. There has likely never been in American history a completely fraud-free election. Someone always does something that is going to be slightly illegal or running afoul of law as written. Because we have 50 states and U.S. territories with their own individual election procedures and laws, okay? And they're all very confusing, and they don't all work with one another very well. Okay? People move. It happens. I mean, it's statistically insignificant, the number of accidental or even purposeful fraudulent election. It's so statistically insignificant that it never changes the outcome, at least not at the presidential level. Maybe for a school board seat or solicitor general, something, minor, minuscule at the local level, the municipal or county level. Sure, there could be something nefarious that happens. But on the federal level, at the presidential level, no. Nothing happens fraudulently that is statistically significant. And the big one this year is the foreign voters, the illegal immigrant, the immigrants who are not naturalized citizens getting to vote. That we heard just days ago, 10 cases in the last half century. 10 cases, not in the last election, not in your hometown, not in your state, not this decade, in the last half century. 10 whole cases. But yeah, the grown-up conversation is, it's kind of like when you clean your house. You use that 99.9% bacteria-free cleaner, all-purpose cleaner. Did it get rid of everything? No. Statistically speaking, biologically speaking, you can't get rid of all bacteria. And you don't want to. You have to have some bacteria. I'm not saying the bacteria is the same as voter fraud, but you can never fully get rid of all bacteria when cleaning your house. There's going to be a speck of bacteria somewhere. Dust your whole house if you want to. Run around with that can of Pledge in the rag. You're not getting rid of all the dust in your house. Did you get rid of most of it? Yes, absolutely. Did you get rid of all of it? Never. Can't. It's impossible. It's impossible. But it's statistically insignificant. I would ask if you actually ran around and dusted your entire house and wiped everything down with your all-purpose cleaner and the 99.9% bacteria-free clean, and you cleaned every surface. You mopped, you've swept and vacuumed. Well, you should sweep and vacuum and then mop. You've wiped down all the surfaces. You've scrubbed everything. You've rinsed everything off, everything. And you ask yourself, is your house clean? Yes. Now, you could be one of those folks who suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder and say, no, there's germs everywhere, because there's bacteria everywhere. There's always going to be a little dust somewhere. There's always going to be a little bacteria everywhere. Yes, that is an obsession. That is something that folks seek therapy for. You get my drift? You're never going to get rid of all voter fraud. And God bless you for trying. But at the presidential level, at the federal presidential level, it is so statistically insignificant, it never changes the outcome. The one time I can think when fraudulent activity actually changed the presidential outcome. It's when the Florida Supreme Court fraudulently stopped counting ballots in the year 2000. And we wound up with George W. Bush in office versus Vice President, then at the time, Al Gore. That is the one time that you could actually say that something that doesn't really pass the sniff test, legally speaking. I mean, they literally stopped counting votes because the margin was closing. Fraudulent? Legal scholars have argued about that for the last quarter century. Legal? Again, they've argued about that for quite a while now. Did it actually change the outcome of a presidential election? Hard not to see that it did, right? J.D. Vance has joined the election denial camp. And this is something that needs to weigh on the hearts and minds of independent or even right-leaning, chilly on Trump Republicans, folks who are just kind of worn thin of his act. And that's not a statistically insignificant number of Americans. Before they go to vote. Early voting's already started in Georgia. It started elsewhere. It's something that has to weigh on the minds of those going to vote. It's not just about Donald Trump anymore. Okay, fine. You know, there was the guardrail. J.D. Vance was the guardrail, right? Well, you know, Donald Trump's a little crazy. He doesn't, he kind of sows these seeds of doubt and division and sort of damages the reputation of our electoral process with all this nonsense. But that was 2020. This is in the past. Well, now he's got a running mate that is equally off the rails. There is no guardrail on this ticket anymore. You thought Donald Trump was nuts? I mean, J.D. Vance isn't swaying at a rally for half an hour crazy, but he wears guy liner and believes that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump crazy. And 4 years ago, that wasn't even J.D. Vance's thought. J.D. Vance considered Trump America's Hitler at one point in time, not all that long ago, in his political chapter of life. And now, he's standing before thousands of crazed Trump fanatics, fearful of telling the truth about the 2020 election because, did you hear them? They're nuts. And is instead fully in the bag with election denialism. So this is for that independent voter who might be listening. And if you're not, if you're firmly in the Kamala camp, you need to work on that independent voter and that Republican voter that you know is kind of sick and tired of the Trump song and dance. It doesn't end with Trump. You can't honestly think walking into the voting booth or the area, it's not really a booth anymore in Georgia, and deciding, yeah, I can live with one more term of Trump because of blah, 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 all the various things that you think are solid rationale for voting for Donald Trump. Because at the end of the day, J.D. Vance will be there to sort of insulate us from the crazy. Nope. Yesterday, he went on record. He's just as crazy. And honestly, what's worse is you can't even say that he's stuck to his values in the last 6-8 years or so, because he has made a complete about-face when it comes to just his views on Donald Trump, his running mate. And if he can be affected by someone who doesn't even hold office, what happens when he's face-to-face with Vladimir Putin? More Ron Show after this. You can follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms at Ron Show ATL, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, Facebook. You can also call the show 404-919-2725. Send me all the smoke. You got some? What I mean by that is, if you ever hear me say or do something that you're like, I don't know about that, Ron, feel free, chime in. 404-919-2725. I am pretty outspoken, obviously, but I'm really outspoken when it comes to marginalized communities, the voting bloc within marginalized communities, who turn to candidates and the political party that praise, not with an A, praise on marginalized communities, that attacks marginalized communities. If you find me, outside of Caitlyn Jenner, find me a trans Republican who, first of all, find me a trans Republican outside of Caitlyn Jenner. And I'm going to question your sanity, their sanity. Their sanity. I'm a little weird on the pronouns too. I'm not gonna lie. Find me, and I've had conversations with black Republicans. I don't get it. Not when you know the full scope of American history and how conservatives, not just Republicans, but conservatives, no matter what party they were in, have fought civil rights, basic human rights for people of color. Hispanic, Latino voters who are considering Donald Trump? Is it because you're here, you're safe, you got yours, you're not worried about anybody? I don't understand it. Donald Trump went on Univision last night for his town hall treatment, and I believe this guy's name was Ramiro Gonzalez. That's it. Yeah, he's a construction worker, lives in Florida, born in New Jersey, of Cuban descent, 56 years of age. He asked the uncomfortable question of Donald Trump that really doesn't have anything to do with Hispanic American issues, but it's a valid issue nonetheless for all American voters.
I am a Republican, no longer registered though. I want to give you the opportunity to try to win back my vote. Okay. Your, I'd say, action and maybe inaction during your presidency and the last few years sort of, was a little disturbing to me. What happened during January 6th and the fact that, you waited so long to take action while your supporters were attacking the Capitol. Mm-hmm. Coronavirus, I thought the public was misled during coronavirus.
Right.
And that many more lives could have been saved if we would have been informed better. And also people in your administration who don't support you. I'm curious how people so close to you and your administration no longer want to support you, so why would I want to support you? If you would answer these questions for me, I would really appreciate it and give you the opportunity. There's, your own vice president doesn't want to support you now.
Thank you, Ramiro. So the people that don't support, a very small portion, we have a tremendous, about 97% of the people in the administration support me. But because it's me, somebody doesn't support, they get a little publicity. The vice president, I disagree with him on what he did. I totally disagreed with him on what he did. Very importantly, you had hundreds of thousands of people come to Washington. They didn't come because of me. They came because of the election. They thought the election was a rigged election, and that's why they came. Some of those people went down to the Capitol. I said peacefully and patriotically, nothing done wrong at all, nothing done wrong. And action was taken, strong action. Ashley Babbitt was killed. Nobody was killed. There were no guns down there. We didn't have guns. The others had guns, but we didn't have guns. And when I say we, these are people that walked down. This was a tiny percentage of the overall, which nobody sees and nobody shows. But that was a day of love from the standpoint of the millions. It's like hundreds of thousands. It could have been the largest group I've ever spoken before. They asked me to speak. I went and I spoke. And I used the term peacefully and patriotically. If you look at the Democrats, what they say, you look at Maxine Waters and you look at Hillary Clinton and you look at what they say, and they don't put that on. They only put Republicans on. But they couldn't get me because of the fact that I said everything's got to be peaceful and patriotic. And we'll see how it all works out. But I think that we're right now in another election. All I want is honest elections. I'm willing to take any chance. I want honest elections.
Far be it from me to fact check the lyingest liar to ever run for American office of that level before. Only half of Trump's original cabinet wants him to win a second term. Not 97%, only half. And while I can sit here and talk about the whole day of love nonsense, let's move. And here's another question that shows it's plausible to ask. Why are Hispanic American voters looking at Donald Trump as a viable option?
My question to you very respectfully is, do you really believe that these people are eating the people's pets?
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And this was just reported. I was just saying what was reported. That's been reported. And eating other things, too, that they're not supposed to be. But this is, all I do is report. I
You're
have
not a reporter.
I was there. I'm going to be there. and we're going to take a look, and I'll give you a full report when I do. But that's been in the newspapers and reported pretty broadly.
That's like the birther thing. Remember, he was going to send folks to Hawaii to investigate and report back to us. And what did we find out? I mean, look, even if you're not an Hispanic American voter and you heard that answer, I'm just responding to what was reported from people, and I heard it, and I'm responding. That's not what you want. Incredible leadership of the world's greatest nation, the commander-in-chief of our armed forces. Well, I heard something, so I had to react. No, that's not what. And again, J.D. Vance was supposed to be the insulation, the guardrail, and J.D. Vance is the one who brought this bullshit to him. I mean, pinch me, this is a bad dream. I every time I see polling, it's still within the margin of error. How can that even possibly be? All right. Kamala Harris went into the foxhole with Bret Baier, and Bret Baier let me down. I'm not going to lie. We'll discuss that. And Lauren Groh-Wargo from Fair Fight Action joins the Ron Show when we return.
This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
A little later in the show, Lauren Groh-Wargo from Fair Fight Action joins the show to discuss the most recent Superior Court decisions invalidating much of what the Georgia State Election Board has tried to enact in the 11th hour, heading into the closing weeks. Yes, the closing 3 weeks of the 2024 general election cycle. First things first, let's discuss the appearance, Vice President Kamala Harris, much touted appearance on Fox News. She went into the foxhole, they call it. And my initial reaction when I heard Bret Baier was going to be the one giving her the questions was, okay, I mean, if you've got to go on Fox News, who do you want asking the questions? Who do you think is going to give you a fair shake? And I thought Bret Baier would be that one. That did not turn out to be the case. Pretty disappointed in Bret Baier. And honestly, I think and I know Fox News isn't running for office, Bret Baier's not running for office, but it's pretty clear who they're in the bag for, right? I think when you're trying to win over women, we talked at length yesterday about Donald Trump's hemorrhaging of the white woman vote, according to polls. He went from getting 55% in 2020. It is now a statistical tie with white women. The largest block of voters when you separate by gender and race. The largest block of voters in the country. Everybody's hand-wringing about, oh my gosh, Kamala's losing black male voter support. Oh my gosh. Well, statistically speaking, they're like 15% of the electorate. And white women, I believe, are 36, it's either 34, 36%. Much larger, more than twice as large. And Donald Trump is losing support in greater numbers. And that's something that his camp should be worried about. You don't see a lot of hand-wringing about that in traditional media. But I think when you're trying to appeal to women, Bret Baier completely overstepping and talking over the Vice President of the United States, who happens to be a female, it's a bad look. Now, don't get me wrong. I do have some criticism for the Vice President with some of her responses. But by and large, I just thought the tone, the tenor of a conversation with a presidential candidate in the closing weeks of a presidential election who happens to be the Vice President of the United States, some respect, sir, some decorum, sir. She is speaking, sir, was called for and sorely lacking. Let's go to some of the audio.
Madam Vice President, thank you for the time.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Brett.
You know, voters tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question.
She's talking, dude.
I was beginning to answer.
You had a question.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish.
You had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
Listen, I don't know Brett Baer. I don't know his educational background. Maybe he skipped 6th or 7th grade. I don't know. Something may have happened. Maybe he fell and hit his head at recess one day, was in a coma, and got to skip ahead and didn't get the basic civics lessons that the rest of us got that it seems evidentiary here he skipped out on. I say that because he talks about having the House, the Senate, the White House. Is he not aware of a thing called the filibuster in the Senate? Is he not aware that inside the Democratic Party, there was the contending with Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, both of who are essentially no longer with the party anymore. I mean, did he skip past that part of the civics lessons where you realize you have to have 60 votes in the Senate to get anything passed, that you have the filibuster there for the minority in the Senate for a reason, to keep things from getting passed that they vehemently disagree with, no matter if you don't have the majority in that Senate, you don't have the majority in the House, and your party doesn't own the White House or doesn't control the White House. I'm asking if Brett Baer is aware of that or just plays to the educational level of the audience of his network. Because it's not an intellectual question. If you're sitting down with someone who is an American political scientist, a professor of political science, and having a substantive discussion on why legislation couldn't get passed despite a party holding the White House, the House, and the Senate, it would come up that, well, that party didn't have a filibuster-proof majority and did not have lockstep support for that legislation, as it were. And so because of that one little fly in the ointment, the filibuster, nothing could get through. She's right. Day one, they presented a bill. 2 months in, President Joe Biden, before his first address at a joint session of the House and Senate, his first State of the Union, essentially. They don't call it that, the first one. His first address to Congress, he wanted immigration reform. He wanted a bipartisan solution to immigration. Republicans instead spent years running to the border. Even Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who wasn't a federal official, running to the border for photo ops with the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, and other prominent Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene among them. Ron DeSantis from Florida, the governor, sending people by plane to Martha's Vineyard. First of all, they weren't coming to Florida. They were coming to... You see what I'm saying? They decided to politic on an immigration problem instead of addressing it legislatively. And the reality is, it's taking me a while to say it, and Kamala Harris only had 20 minutes with Brett Baer. What I'm saying is, if I'm the vice president of the United States, I'm running for president. And I don't know, maybe one day I will. If this is a question I'm being asked, I am going to instead say, listen, the realities in our American political system are you have to have bipartisan solutions to any problem that both parties agree is a problem. And instead of running to the border for photo ops and grandstanding, we asked for, on day one, bipartisan immigration reform. The president stood before Congress, a joint session, in a televised address and says, I want a bipartisan solution to immigration. Republicans are essentially saying, well, we don't control anything, but it's our way or the highway. Well, that is not a negotiating position. That is a hold your breath till you're blue in the face until you get your way position, and, well, you're just going to pass out. Nothing's going to get accomplished. That's the answer. That is the answer. When a bipartisan solution did finally get crafted, when Democrats waited and waited and waited, and Republicans in the House and Senate finally said, we got to negotiate with them. Yes, you do. You always have to negotiate with them. When they finally did, they had bipartisan support for a bill. It got struck down by the man she's running against. And I know she's got to figure out a 90-second way to say all that, but that's what she's got to say. So there's my criticism of him, constantly over-talking her and asking a stupid question, and her not having an answer that actually lays blame where it belongs, at the party that likes to politicize immigration concerns instead of work in a bipartisan manner, which is a must. It has to be that way in Washington for anything to get accomplished. That's the answer. But Brett Brer wasn't done.
Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday, campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Brett,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election. Because there was a solution, Brett.
She's absolutely right. There was a solution. And there would have been a solution before Laken Riley had died. See, this is where you got to work on the messaging, Madam Vice President. Yes, there could have been a solution on day one when we asked for one upon entering the Oval Office in January of 2021. Or in March of 2021, when he asked a joint session of Congress for bipartisan immigration reform. Yes, we could have had solutions to that. And Remain in Mexico, Title 42, all these things that the courts lobbied about and struck down and ended, and eventually came to conclude that the administration had to do, there were solutions to deal with that. There have been solutions, bipartisan solutions, offered for decades now. Republicans hold their nose and wait till they get their way or the highway, which just isn't how things work. In Washington, you have to have bipartisan agreement. Republicans have not sought bipartisan agreement since the 1990s about just about anything. I mean, my God, we had to wheel in a dying Ted Kennedy to get the Affordable Care Act. We had to hold our breath as a Senator John McCain, who was on his last leg, gave the thumb up or thumb down to saving the Affordable Care Act. Is it not evident? Is it not clear that you have to have bipartisan support to get anything accomplished in Washington? It seems Republicans are unaware of that. Another key moment from the sit down with Vice President Kamala Harris and Brett Brer yesterday.
If he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States, why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
That's a great question.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%?
Yes.
Are they stupid?
Yeah.
What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
Yep. We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
First of all, I give her credit. She called not just Bret Baier, but Fox News empirically out for airing the clip of him responding to what he said, which, by the way, he didn't back down from, instead of airing the clip of him saying it many times.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. What? They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
And a gangster.
So, Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
He's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Just kind of as an aside. You know what? That clip right there should be run as campaign ads for Vice President Kamala Harris' campaign. In the closing days, she should get that clip. Someone should get that clip. It's easy to get. And formulate a campaign ad, because that is a strong moment for her. And that right there, no matter what she did the rest of that interview, and I thought she did a pretty credible job, is the takeaway. That is the, wow, that is the viral moment. Bret Baier even said that. Well, I think she got what she wanted out of this. Yep, I agree 1,000%. You, however, sir, you didn't come out looking too good. All right, final few minutes of the Ron Show for the day. And I want to thank Lauren Grow-Wargo for joining us, CEO of Fair Fight Action. How are you today?
I'm quite well. How are you, Ron?
I'm good. So good news out of the courts yesterday and the day before. Superior Court judges basically smacking down just about everything the MAGA-filled state election board has tried to do here in the state of Georgia in the closing weeks. And we got your statement yesterday. I just wanted to see if you wanted to elaborate on that just a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a good day in court for anybody who is pro-American democracy. And we are the majority in this country. Fear not. The anti-MAGA coalition is the majority. And we've seen the courts really defend that in 3 different decisions this week, pushing back against the Trump-endorsed state election board in Georgia that I'm sure your listeners know has been trying to change the rules here at the 11th hour in an unprecedented set of rule changes, most of which it's come out that they were written by the RNC and Trump world. So really strong ruling yesterday, shooting down all of their new rules that really had a goal to create a lot of chaos and confusion. And for me, let's backing way up. What we're dealing with here in Georgia is 4 years ago, the Trump operation leveraged every asset all the way up to Trump himself trying to strong-arm Raffensperger to try to overturn a close result. So they have been spending the past 4 years getting legislation passed, moving radicals onto the state election board, and changing through law how elections work, and then organizing around conspiracy theories. And so it's really good news this week on the state election board. However, we have to remember this comes into a context of more anti-voter legislation being passed in Georgia over the past 4 years here and around the country. 2021, for example, was the year in our country where more anti-voter bills were passed in American history, only surpassed by the number that were passed in 2023. So yes, this is a big win, but I just want to remind everybody, make your plan to vote. Go to peachvote.com if you're in Georgia. Get the good information about where to go and what to do, because there are a compendium of other changes that have happened meant to disenfranchise and shave away the margin.
And before we go feeling sorry for the Secretary of State's office, Brad Raffensperger, Gabriel Sterling et al., we have to remember that they also erected a website that makes it easy for someone not to just deregister themselves, but with just some basic information about somebody else to deregister someone else. My friend, Ludwig Frontier Ram, I'm sitting here getting all this information. Anyway, he had to deal with this himself. New naturalized citizen as of a couple of years ago, was registered, did vote in 2 election cycles, and lo and behold, had to go through the process of getting his voter validation taken care of again because of a website that just came out of thin air to deal with a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah, that is really unfortunate, and I'm sorry for your friend and for the Georgians who've dealt with this. The disinformation and lies around immigrant voting are particularly pernicious, both nationally and here in Georgia among the far right. And we're seeing naturalized citizens being disproportionately targeted in voter suppression efforts. And look, what the Secretary of State in Georgia has done is toe the line with conspiracy theorists up to a point. He championed SB 202, which was the big omnibus voter suppression bill that kicked him off the state election board.
Right.
You will find he brags about that bill all the time, even though it has a direct line between what happened in 2021 and today. Yep. And look, I think we're seeing in Georgia state officials who are Republican try to navigate this. So first of all, the Republican Attorney General warned that the state election board was out of bounds. And we have seen that held up in the courts. We have seen Brad Raffensperger rightly say that certification of the vote is mandatory, not discretionary. So we see them pushing back on obvious overreaches and conspiracy theories. At the same time, these same officials, including the governor, have been champions of bills that have prevented provisional ballots from being cast by Georgian American citizens, that have promoted the lie of immigrant voting, being part of efforts to say that only citizens can vote. Oh, of course, only citizens can vote. That is a red herring. That is a giveaway to the conspiracy theorists. So what I think we have in Georgia, we are the only battleground state for 270 for the presidency that is fully run by Republicans. And I would argue they're not conspiracy theory Republicans. They're good old-fashioned voter suppression Republicans who are trying to navigate this. And we're seeing them kind of slalom through that here in the fall. But yes, good news this week, but I think we just want to make sure Georgians understand this is going to be a close race. Every vote matters. Make sure you vote early. Don't wait for the last minute. If you've had any issues with your absentee ballot, go ahead and call your county, get that canceled, and go vote early in person. Our postal issues are too severe that if you haven't sorted your mail ballot by now, you need to go vote early in person.
Right.
And we got weekend voting coming up this weekend, lots of convenient hours. So we can win in Georgia, absolutely. But it's, this is going to be a fight through the end.
So my last question to you is, watching all of this take place in the last 4 years with the Stacey Abrams 2018 run in the backdrop, is it not just kind of hilarious and ironic to see so much work done to try and overturn an election on false claims when there were some valid claims that we should have had at least some hearings or discussions on after the 2018 gubernatorial race?
Look, here's the deal. Voter suppression in Georgia is alive and well.
Yeah.
And what we saw in the 2018 race was Brian Kemp, the sitting Secretary of State, overseeing his own election for governor, which was unprecedented in Georgia's history.
Yeah, it was insane.
Yeah, there are previous secretaries of state that have run and who've recused themselves. And so the pushback we did around that election wasn't about the results. We accepted the results. It was around the poll closures, the mass voter purges, him overseeing his election, and was a forward-looking suit that really instigated some positive changes in the state. I think the difference now is, we can both critique the voter suppression policies of the state. I mean, you look at the voter suppression bill of SB 202, which had the bananas piece around you can't give out water to people in line, which is just kind of bananas. But then you have more pernicious things in there, like, if you now show up at the wrong location on election day, you used to be given a provisional ballot. You're an American citizen. It's your right to vote. Now you show up before 5 on election day, you're told to drive to your correct location. Why? Why are they doing that? Why are they picking away at provisional votes? Well, because of the 12,000 margin, 7,000 of that margin in 2020 were Black Democrats who voted a provisional ballot on Election Day. And can you imagine, had those 7,000 gotten kicked out, we would have been looking at 3,000 to 4,000 vote margin.
Well, and it's not like they don't change and close locations left and right anyway. I mean, they make this confusing on purpose.
Correct. And then you've got the MAGA folks who have been infiltrated kind of every level of this over the past 4 years, just throwing all kinds of chaos into it. So look, I think, Georgians have a long history with voter suppression, mass voter challenges, for example, that have been really resurrected here recently and further empowered the past couple of years by Georgia Republicans.
180,000 voter challenges by 6 people. That's nuts.
Yeah, it's unacceptable. Most of them have gotten dismissed, but let's be clear on what their strategy is here. Their strategy is, should there be a close result that is not the result they want, you're going to be hearing about those dismissed voter challenges. They're going to suddenly say those dismissed voter challenges in whatever county, there are, quote, illegal voters voting. And it's all a lie. Yep. But what they are trying to create for themselves is multiple avenues to overturn a close win for Kamala. And so, we've done a lot of focus groups. I'm sure you talk to a ton of people, Ron. Georgia voters know what's up. There's no secret to this anymore. Yeah. It's hiding in plain sight. Everybody knows what their strategy is. And the Georgians we've talked to, both in research and just in our lives, are very clear that their vote matters, and they wouldn't be trying to mess with their vote if it didn't matter. And so in some ways, it's having, I think, a little bit of a backlash effect on these guys because their voter suppression is so naked and clear. So look, we can fight voter suppression, we can fight election sabotage, and celebrate high turnout at the same time.
Yes.
Both of these things can be true, and I am really proud of our state. I'm proud of these great, strong early vote numbers, and we're just going to keep fighting like hell to make sure every Georgian can cast their vote and get it counted, and know that the people are with us, as in they are anti-authoritarianism, they are anti-fascist. The anti-MAGA majority in our state and country is the majority. In fact, if every registered voter today in Georgia voted, we would elect Kamala Harris by 53-54%. So the numbers are with us. We just have to make sure our folks turn out. It's going to be really close.
Lauren Grow-Wargo, CEO of Fair Fight Action. Thanks for joining the Ron Show today.
Thanks, Ron. Really appreciate it.
All right, that is a full show. Our thanks to Lauren Grow-Wargo and Max at the team for Fair Fight Action, coordinating that call at the last minute this morning. We do appreciate that, Max and Lauren. Show notes at ronshowatl.com. The show airs weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. and 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. to midnight at Progressive Voices via TuneIn, and then wherever you podcast. Show notes for you. We got them. ronshowatl.com. Have a great day, and if you haven't done so already, go vote.